you were coming home from school and there were like three channels for like children or teenagers or to like be picking from, and it's
Yeah.
like you're kind of like divided into three subcategories, but everyone's aware of the other three.
Yeah.
And again, you're looking at today and it's like, oh, I don't even use TikTok, I use this, I'm in Discord all night, or I'm
Yeah.
in whatever or I'm on Twitch. Like those places, there's so many different spots for people to go, whereas when we were kids it's like I had three options for to choose from, and that's what I
Yeah.
watched. And then I reenacted it in the playground or after school with friends, like talking about those things.
Welcome to Making the Brand, the podcast where marketing and pop culture collide. I'm your host, Brianne Fleming. I can't wait to chat about brands, boy bands, and everything in between. Because brands who have a pulse on pop culture can create adoring fans of their own. We love a good throwback on this podcast. We are all about nostalgia around here. And today's guest is going to shed light on how nostalgia is evolving and how pop culture is changing, especially as a marketing tool. So please join me in welcoming Ted Harrison. Welcome to the show, Ted.
Thank you so much. I'm pumped to be here. It's fun to be sitting here with this background, which I've seen many times. So it's like fun to be on it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, like you said, this has been a long time coming. I know we connected on Twitter back when you were the head of production over there, and you've had a lot of new and exciting ventures since. And I also know you're the author of Entrepreneurial Creativity, and now you work as the founder of neuemotion. So that is really exciting, and I want to hear all about it. So neuemotion, it's a video and animation company that you say is rooted in human psychology. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that, you mentioned my background at Twitter, one of the things that I'm sure you're familiar with to a certain extent is that we had some really great ad products, particularly for brand marketing, but we also kind of in the performance area also kind of lacked or were a little bit behind some of the other platforms. And so what I found over time was that I needed to look beyond just the data set in front of me and like learn about the ways in which we can get humans engaging with the content. And so long story short, I went down too many rabbit holes, which, fortunately we get to talk about rabbit holes today,
Yes.
going down some cultural stuff. But the big thing for me was just realizing that our brains are wired to consume content in certain ways. And so the more I leaned into like learning and understanding that, the more the content like excelled. And so we started to implement a lot of those principles while I was at Twitter. And I left back in September and launched neuemotion in October of 2023. And it's been fun to watch this already get implemented in some of our clients' content and see the fruits of that, or of what we put into like all this research for years. So it's fun. And I think it's really just getting back to basic human principles, because it's so easy these days to forget in the middle of all the talk about algorithms and AI and all this stuff that the audience is human. And so the more we can do to structure our content in a way that humans actually care about it, the better off we'll be.
Yes, I resonate with that a lot. As someone who teaches social media in a university setting, people often will question, like, how do you teach social media? Like, the platforms change constantly. And I always stress that it's more about teaching how people work and the psychology behind it versus the actual nitty gritty of the platform. So I love that you're incorporating the human element in everything that you do there.
Yeah.
So is there anything more we should know about your background and your decision to launch neuemotion? Or do you want to share more about the types of clients that you work with and just what that journey has been like? I know it's still so new, just looking back to October. Congrats on all the success so far.
Thank you. Yeah, it's still very new, and but it's been growing quickly. It's also fun. I just made our first hire for a full-time hire over here as well to help lead our production. Her name's Robin Wood, and very excited to have her on board. She also has a background. She worked with me at Twitter as well. And so some of our clients, we really have been operating largely in the B2B space so far. We've got some other stuff in the works too, but currently two of our bigger clients really are Salesforce and Catalyte, which are two companies that are both leveraging AI in very different ways. And so it's been fun working and partnering with them and like really taking their brand marketing and the bits and pieces to the next level.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, so it's been good, and like building a company is a journey in and of itself. But I always like to joke too that when I was a little kid, I think I said this because it was just like fun to know the word entrepreneur. I always joke I wanted to be one, one day, or like I didn't actually joke. I wanted to be one, and now here I am as one. And like you mentioned, the book is entrepreneurial creativity, so taking a lot of the principles in that to apply to building a business, as well as the content we're making for our clients and customers.
Yeah, I will definitely plug the book in the description so people can check that out and learn from your wisdom. But my hat goes off to anyone that publishes a book. I know that is no small feat. So thank you for sharing your expertise and putting it together and helping other people with it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely a labor of love.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of love, I want to talk to you about your pop culture interests right now or growing up, past and present, because we're going to get into nostalgia, of course, but I'm just curious on a personal note, what are some pop culture fandoms that you may be in? What are some things that you grew up loving, as young, very enterprising Ted? What were you what were you into back then?
Yeah, no, so I think I'd be remiss not to mention sports in general, but
Mhm.
but more specifically, I grew up in Oklahoma and was instilled. Like, there wasn't no professional sports teams at the time. There's obviously the Thunder now,
Yeah.
and I've kind of really found myself in like the college sports landscape. It is definitely by far my biggest passion. If you follow me on Twitter, you're getting way too many Baylor tweets because I talk about Baylor sports all the time. But what's funny is like as like all the platforms have evolved, there's this like unique niche or niche of people who like love college sports in a particular way because and part of the reason I love college sports so much is because everyone's really good at what they do, but also not so good that there aren't still kind of hilarious moments. And like there's like a group of people, especially like on Twitter and places like that, where just calling out the absurdity that will happen in the sport. I love to go watch a good clip where like a college basketball game will be happening and like everyone like there's like 10 straight possessions where everyone's missing layups. And there's something about that that's just like so fun because it's also so relatable. But I've also always been a big fan of movies and following along. And we also obviously had the Oscars recently. So very, very heavily invested in what's going on in Hollywood. I'm not the only one, MCU fan. So following along with everything going on there, even though it's a little murky at the moment. I'm not quite sure where we're going. And we have all the drama around some of the casting that's happened lately that's a bit unique and interesting. And I'm curious to see how they play it out. But I'm always impressed with what Kevin Feige's been able to like put together across all the different films and universes.
Yeah. And I feel like there's nothing like March Madness on social media and beyond. It's so special. And to your point, there's just something different about college sports. It's less of a business, like to know that you can see someone you went to school with that's also on this team that's being represented on a national level. You could just pass them on campus. It's not just someone that signs a contract for a paycheck. It's more, I don't know, communal and community driven. And I'm just a big fan also. So I'm glad you spotlighted that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
awesome.
So today we are chatting all about the science of nostalgia and how it's evolving. And we're also going to do a deep dive on one of the most iconic and memorable commercials of the early 2000s. When you told me about this commercial, I didn't even have to look it up. I could still hear it in my head. We're going to get to it soon. We'll leave that as a teaser. But I'm curious, from your point of view, what has traditionally made nostalgia such an effective marketing opportunity for brands?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Nostalgia plays so much into just like making us feel comfortable and safe, right? And whenever you're trying to get your message to resonate with an audience, the more you can tie it to those types of feelings, the more you will resonate with that audience. And I think the thing that's like interesting is we like to approach our content and like whenever we're trying to get people's attention through this kind of general framework that happens to be an acronym, which is CRUNCH. So it's challenge, relevance, unexpected, novelty, contradiction, and honor. So I could go through, we could like have, I'm sure for like a class, a whole class on each one of those particular topics.
Yeah.
But the one that like I find that novelty fits in like probably at the highest hierarchy right underneath is relevance. And what nostalgia does is it kind of grasps onto something that our brains are inclined to like want to like feel good about things. It's similar to like, honestly, it's like everyone loves to say they've been on a podcast, but then it's like one thing to have to do it, as you probably are very familiar with. It's like in a year from now, I'll be like, oh, remember when I was on that pod? Like you remember it more fondly than like all the prep that you're doing or whatever it takes to be able to get things done. And so there's a way that our brains operate to like make that feel better. Anything in the past, like that's happened before, that we can grab onto, and we've like kind of made it better in our minds. So it's a huge opportunity for marketers to play into that. And that like, again, sits under this relevance piece. And for the last few years, it's obviously been very easy in a way as marketers have played up the nostalgia with like what basically all the millennials now that all have the purchasing power in the world.
Yes,
we're all living in the 2000s, like when in that area, or like late 90s, early 2000s. And what's interesting about that time period is it was also the last time really, and maybe I'm getting a bit of ahead of myself here, but it was the last time that we had these like gigantic shared experiences that happened culturally. And it's not to say that those don't happen now. Like obviously we had the Oscars recently and we had the Super Bowl and we have a couple of big tentpole events throughout the course of a given year. But when you think about it, everyone can find their interest in all these different corners of the internet now. And so someone may be completely iconic in an area that I had no idea about. Like I also love chess personally. Like I love kind of following from a distance. And what's interesting is like, there's like certain people or figures in that world that like, to me, it's like, oh yeah, that person. But if I brought it up with even like a friend that's close to me now, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I don't even understand. And I do think it's going to present an interesting challenge as we move forward for marketers to be able to tap into that, because nostalgia for one person is going to be very different to the next person. You even look recently, not to get too far into this, but with I'm blanking on his name, but the creator of like Dragon Ball Z just passed away.
Oh yeah.
And that was a big shared experience that a lot of people had growing up with that anime. And you saw the outpouring of love across the internet for this creator. And yet like, what is that now? Like, where are those pieces that everyone's coming home from school to watch that? That's just not happening as much these days.
Yeah. Or, with Matthew Perry passing, it felt like an entire generation was grieving together. And you're right. Is that trend going to continue with all of these experiences now being more fragmented? But I love what you said about how nostalgia evokes a feeling, because I feel like that's one of the markers of an effective marketing message, is to get people to feel something. And if you turn toward nostalgia, it's already baked in. It's going to make people go back to that moment or a person or thing that they remember from their past. So it does evoke those feelings automatically. But you have said that nostalgia is going to be more difficult for marketers in a few years. So could you elaborate on that and the shifts that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is going to be, okay, especially when you're doing big brand marketing, which is a lot of what we're doing at neuemotion. You're wanting to be able to talk to a lot of people in that. Even when you are getting into the various corners of the internet, you still want to have things that are relatable to everybody. And I think prior to this, I don't know if you're familiar with like Channel One, which was like piped into public schools. It was like the kind of the school kids like news. That was like a big thing in the late 90s and early 2000s. And you look back on that and like, we were all getting the same messages across the United States.
Yeah.
And now like TikTok, the algorithm is giving us something different. And so I think that as like marketers go to move forward, like if we look at like, what does the Super Bowl look like? What does the brand marketing look like in 10 years or 20 years from now, when Gen Z makes up the bulk of the purchasing power and they're more of the target audience?
Yeah.
It's going to be like, okay, do I go with Charlie D'Amelio or do I go with like, you're kind of like all over the place with like, who are the genuine icons of the entire generation? And there are a few. I think that there are plenty of arguments. I'm never going to present something and not say that there's not some truth in the other ways as well. We have like Zendaya is like huge, obviously.
Yeah.
And so there are people who potentially transcend this, but at the same time, they are fewer and fewer as there are more and more celebrities in the world around us.
Yeah. And I know we've kind of talked about mass media being a big part of it. Like, I think that blurs the lines of who is a celebrity now, or if you might have celebrity just within kind of the corners and walls of social media, but if you're not in mass media, have you truly achieved celebrity status? It's just,
Right.
I feel like Charlie D'Amelio, she is one that, like, once she was starting to appear in Super Bowl commercials and she was on Dancing with the Stars, and it's like, okay, now my parents know who she
Yes.
is. So it's just interesting to see, the different types of media and what that means for fame as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, even recently, I look at it just like with the peer set that I have, and I look out like my wife is a founder of a company, and she was in Inc. magazine, and like it's so interesting because it's like, oh, this is cool. Here's a physical magazine and it's like somehow validates across generations in a way that being like, oh, my TikTok got 2 million views, like doesn't hit the same way.
Yeah.
So you do need those validation points. And of course, we're also living through an age where mass media and like big media is struggling. And so again, what are going to be the validator points moving forward? And what are the things that marketers are going to tap into that's not going to immediately divide the audience? Because as many Charlie D'Amelio fans as there are, there's also the opposite version of that. It's like, oh, I'm above that. A lot of Gen Z or millennials, no, that's not me. Like there is that divisiveness that kind of comes into play. Whereas in the 2000s, who didn't love Usher?
Yeah. Yes. And as we know, millennials, it's now our time to be the target audience for the Super Bowl halftime show. So that's been great to see.
No, nothing makes you feel quite, the other day I was in a grocery store and realized that all the music was, playing. It was like my generation's music. And I'm like, oh, great. Yes, I am old.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure the Backstreet Boys are right there. I'm a big fan. And I came out to them in the grocery store aisle. But it's so true. It's like seeing your name in print or seeing your name in lights or being featured in a commercial or some of those mass media things. It's kind of like when you've truly made it, like that still carries a lot more weight, even if you are getting more views and eyeballs and things on TikTok. I had a friend that worked at the agency that represented Moon Pie, and he had this tweet that went viral, and it was like featured in Mashable and all these things. And I remember being able to appreciate that, and I was congratulating him, and he's like, thank you for getting it because my parents don't. It's very different to understand what is perceived as success. And I'm sure in your industry and working with your clients, hopefully they understand what is a true marker of and what's meaningful virality and brand awareness today. So
for sure.
Yeah. So let's get nostalgic a bit. I know we talked about millennials and how our minds are kind of segmented in that time period that we grew up in, the late 90s, early 2000s types of eras. So could you elaborate what was different about this time compared to our media consumption now? I was there. I remember it. I remember appointment television just every day after school watching TRL, and we all had that shared experience. But what else have you observed?
I think that what's really fascinating is like, and this has been covered in plenty of places, but the fact that we were, you were coming home from school and there were like 3 channels for like children or teenagers or to like be picking from, and it's like you're kind of like divided into 3 subcategories, but everyone's aware of the other 3. And again, you're looking at today and it's like, oh, I don't even use TikTok, I use this, I'm in Discord all night, or I'm in whatever or I'm on Twitch. Like those places, there's so many different spots for people to go, whereas when we were kids, it's like I had 3 options to choose from, and that's what I watched. And then I reenacted it in the, playground or after school with friends, like talking about those things. It's genuinely like, it's both fascinating that how quickly something can pick up now. Like, so you can get like a trend that sweeps through, but there's not as much staying power because it's like, well, now we're ready for the next thing because there's so much available to us. Whereas, you go back to the Matthew Perry piece, like everyone being consumed with friends, that was appointment television. Like people were stopped to listen and watch and like pay attention. That was like, what was available. Now it's like, do I want to watch that for the third time, or do I want to like see something new? And then ultimately you settle back on The Office and see that again for the
Yeah.
fourth or fifth time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of like, just growing up and having those shared experiences, like your household all kind of watched the same thing. Like I remember watching the VMAs, and the next day, like my friend's mom drove us to school, and like she was talking about it because her kids were watching it. And it's like everyone in the household was kind of watching the same thing. And now everyone has their own device, their own phone, their own reason to be watching whatever they want. And no one's bored anymore. No one no one is limited to those channels or to those options because it's all in the palm of our hands. So there's a lot going on with that.
Yeah. It's hard not to just continue to jump on the nostalgia piece, because it's just like now it's nostalgia is flooding on this. I remember being like so excited that I was finally old enough to stay up a little bit extra to watch Cheers with my parents.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, now I can watch the reruns of Cheers, and I'm like old enough to be able to stay up past like what my siblings' bedtime is, so I get to watch this. And so I'm like watching Cheers. There's zero chance that I'm picking up Cheers as a a kid in this day and age.
Yeah, because you have your own device, you have your own choice, and it's kind of sad when we put it that way, that maybe families aren't bonding the same ways, or kids on the playground the next day at school, they're not talking about the same things because they were all in their own little corners of the internet versus all experiencing it together. It was funny. Even last night, I was at a friend's house, and she had a couple girlfriends over, and one other person brought up the Kate Middleton thing and how Kate Middleton is missing, and everyone else besides me and her had no idea what was going on. And I'm like, this is all my Twitter feed is talking about right now.
Yeah.
But if you're not on Twitter, maybe you're not getting that. So I'm curious, in your point of view, how has Twitter, if at all, or how has social media maybe bridged the gap a little bit and helped people be more in tune to trending topics? I mean, except for my friends that aren't on Twitter, but I feel like it still is a great place for trending topics and being in the know if you're actually on it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's honestly the biggest challenge. Like, and it's all, even in my time at Twitter, so it does help bridge that gap. There is like a semblance of, oh, this is what's happening in the world right now. Everyone's talking about it, everyone being general, they're not literally everyone. But one of the things that's like really, I guess, like interesting about it, I think, as you think about it moving forward, is that first of all, because of what's happened, there's like more segmentation, there's threads now, and there's other options potentially like rising to the top, like the ability to take that place over. That splits up the audience. So it means what may be trending there is not trending over here. But at the same time, it's like, to your point, it can bridge the gap, especially in like, I would expect big moments like the Olympics this summer, and like World Cup and like other like global events. It does bring around a sense of like, okay, we're kind of all together talking about these different things. But then you think about it, like back to your conversation with your friends, you could have really thrown them for a loop to be like, oh yeah, and like there were rumors that she was in a Willy Wonka reenactment, and everyone would be like, wait, what? Like that, like it would be like really like be really thrown off at that point, because obviously if you're on Twitter now, you might have to explain this.
Yeah.
Because if you're listening to this, you may actually be going, what on earth are they talking about? But there was the whole, what was going on is in Glasgow, right? The Willy Wonka thing. Yeah, where they had this kind of a scam situation, but it became a viral hit in a way that they were doing this like Willy Wonka experience for fans. And so then the rumors, because it was all happening at the same time, were that Kate Middleton was playing a role in in all of that, which again is just the absurdity of the internet. But like you and I have that, other people might have that, like, but it's just going to be a couple of people and not everyone together.
Yeah, lots of photo editing between Willy Wonka and Kate Middleton. Just a lot of, misrepresentation going on. But one of my favorite moments on Twitter, I mean, thinking back to the pandemic, which is not my favorite moment, but during the pandemic, I remember when The Last Dance came out, the whole Michael Jordan documentary, and I felt like everyone was home. That documentary was brand new, and like everyone was watching it and tweeting it in real time. And it was something that hadn't been just like a Netflix drop where everything was available. It felt like appointment television again.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see, you know, millennials, like we're grown adults now. Like I'm not watching that with my family. I'm kind of watching it with with other people and strangers on Twitter.
Yeah.
So the shared experiences with different people and in different ways. But that was the last time it felt very reminiscent of appointment television for me. I don't know if you have any memorable moments on Twitter or things that you remember watching kind of collectively with everyone on Twitter, but that's one for me.
No, they're definitely like, I mean, I think of like one of the big ones I remember was like the eclipse a few years ago, where it was like everyone was like participating in that as it swept across the United States. Or big show, like there was a lot, definitely like happened a lot with shows. So like or not House of Dragons, the Game of Thrones. I've suddenly jumped to the sequel, but Game of Thrones like had that experience where it's like everyone is like tuned in and watching this thing right now. I am curious to know what Netflix is going to do. I feel this is still a ways away, but with Stranger Things, because I think this is another good, like in the future, a good example of one that will bring people together to all kind of watch together, depending on what they decide to do with the release schedule. If they end up just dumping it all out there, it's going to look different than if they do it in like a segments or weekly, which I think that they're currently debating what they're going to end up doing with that.
Yeah. It's been interesting to see how they've been experimenting with Love is Blind, how they hook us and give us just a few episodes. Then you have to wait for the weddings and you have to wait for the reunion. It's working though. I think they really have it down to a science, and maybe they'll try something similar with Stranger Things. This episode is brought to you by Klaviyo, which is your go-to platform for smarter email marketing, SMS, reviews, and so much more. They just introduced Klaviyo AI, which sets the stage for smarter marketing decisions that help your brand make more money with less effort. With features like segment creation, form optimization, predictive insights, and more, Klaviyo AI empowers you to make informed decisions and puts your marketing data and audience insights into profitable action. So check them out. It's all linked in the description. And as always, thanks for listening. So, okay, we have to talk about this, this commercial, the Sears Central Air commercial. If you're a millennial listening to this, you might remember this, but could you take us back there to this? I'll see if I can actually edit it in here to refresh people's memories, but could you speak to that commercial? Because I know you've done a lot of research on it, and actually, I think you said you interviewed someone that was in the commercial.
Yes. Yeah, I did. I was fascinated. So this commercial, first of all, if you don't end up editing it in, I'm just going to give you a couple of lines, and it's going to, everyone's synapses in their brains are going to just start firing. But it's like, sorry, I'm like laughing even like thinking about it. But it's call today, and it's no, you'll call now. I'll call now.
Yeah.
I cannot live another day without air conditioning.
Says tomorrow's gonna be hotter.
Hotter?
Like yesterday.
Yesterday? Yesterday you said you'd call Sears.
I'll call today.
You call now.
I'll call now.
Now's the best time to save big on a Sears installed central air conditioner.
Another scorcher, you know, like all those just a few little lines, and suddenly you're back to the summer watching cartoons as a kid and getting served the same Sears air conditioning commercial for the probably like literal 1,000th time.
Yeah.
And yes, I did a gigantic deep dive on this because it became such a topic with some of my friends about like how we all knew this commercial by heart. Like the second it starts playing, it's like I can visualize everything. Like it's shot with these Dutch angles, so like everything's like at it. It's like very reminiscent of the time. And so it stood out. So I like did a huge deep dive. I found the actress who is in the commercial and asked her, I was like, did you know that this was like a big deal or that it was playing all the time? And she's like, other than getting some residual checks for it playing, I didn't really know it was that big of a deal. She was like, it's funny. It was like kind of a last second thing for me. She was actually pregnant at the time and was trying to hide it from the producers because she didn't want it to interfere with her being able to get the role. And so she was just talking about it. It's been wild because she's over time gotten more and more people who've reached out to her to be like, did you know that this was like a huge deal? And
Yeah.
she actually didn't realize it was a big deal until there was a TikTok of the video posted, and her daughter, who she was pregnant with at the time,
Oh, during the commercial?
who said, "Mom, did you know that this is like a big deal?" And that's when she kind of realized, oh, I didn't know it was like, emblazoned into everyone's minds who was growing up around that time. And
Yeah.
then I never got the answers I wanted to get, but I got a response at least from the at the time, like the CEO over North America at Sears. It was it's like right in that window of time where it's hard to figure out who was doing what at different companies. If it was like if it was 10 years later, you could find the specific people. But I was trying to figure out like what the actual ads, like media buy, looked like to understand why it played so many times and what the strategy was. Like in my head, I don't know if this is true or not, but like in my head, they must have seen every summer like a huge spike in sales as a result of this media or this commercial playing. Instead of like run it again or run it again. Like there's no sense in, yeah. Yes. People were calling now.
Yes.
But I did get a response to be like, that's, it's like kind of laughing off, like, this is great that you're trying to figure this out. I don't have any details about this specific commercial. But yeah, it played, judging by what I can find, it was over a couple of different summers, and it was constant. It was almost every other commercial break for most of the summers, because they were able to they were leveraging a cheaper ad spin for like during daytime television, hoping to get moms at home to see it while their kids are watching. Like that was the entire point.
Like, what was I watching? I mean, I was probably watching MTV, but if they were showing it on Nickelodeon, I mean, I wasn't calling to get the air fixed when I was 10 years old, but it was everywhere.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe these days that a commercial could take you to a specific moment in time.
Yeah. They got their money's worth for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So would you say that our generation is really the last generation that was unified in this way? Like I now want to talk to someone in Gen Z and ask them what their experience with commercials is like, or if there are any that stick out to them maybe growing up. But do you think we're the last ones?
Yeah, I think that we're going to be the oddballs, as we kind of have been as a generation, in the sense that we lived in this era kind of before the internet, but then it did really kind of come on. And like, then now you look at just like the way that and frankly, I have no, like, this is not one of those like this generation versus that generation thing. It's just different. And I think that you'd be really hard pressed to find someone in Gen Z. I'm happy to be wrong. Would love to hear from someone in Gen Z to hear that I'm wrong on this, but that can find those pieces of content that exist that are so ubiquitous amongst the generation. And again, there are plenty of arguments on the other side. Like I like to joke, like there's a reason I see or not every, that's overgeneralization, but a lot of kids in Gen Z with the similar haircuts. I can't believe how old I'm sounding now.
I know. Well, we did the frosted tip, so we succumbed to all the trends and stuff as well.
Yeah. And when you see that, it's like clearly there are some things that seep past that, like the isolation, or the bits and pieces that are fragmented across the internet. But in terms of just like genuinely a piece of content that everyone has seen, it's really tough to think about like what that looks like, especially content that's like reoccurring over and over and over again, like the commercials we're discussing earlier.
Yeah. I think maybe the last of it, something I've noticed about Gen Z, and it might be people who are kind of on the cusp of millennials and Gen Z, but I noticed there's still a lot of connection around Disney stars. Like, I don't think I was really like the Hannah Montana generation. I was more of the Lizzie McGuire generation, but like High School Musical, Hannah Montana, The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, whatever show Selena Gomez was on. Like I've noticed that Gen Z really clings to that experience. Maybe it's not commercials, but I feel like that was kind of a moment that was theirs, like that lineup of stars and shows.
That's a good point. Cause I do think, and I wonder if that's like, because I'm just trying to like age or date what those kind of things that you're mentioning, but that almost is like the older Gen Z. And I kind of wonder if that's like the kind of the defining part of like living in that gap. It's like right before we lost, like right before we lost that, like, oh, we're all in on this.
Yeah.
Like, cause you're to your point. Yeah. I'm a little past High School Musical and Hannah Montana and those shows. but
Mhm.
I can definitely see like a few just a little few years behind being like, yeah, that was like me. And that
Yeah.
being kind of like the end of like that ubiquity.
Yeah, we were the TGIF generation with the Boy Meets World lineup and Family Matters and
Yes. Full
all of
House.
those. Yes. Ugh, good times. Good times. We also could probably do a deep dive on how the sitcom is supposedly dead and we don't really see those anymore. It's very sad, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We could go for another 3 hours.
Yes. We'll just keep reminiscing. We've got a lot to cover. But I'm curious if you've noticed any other trends or observations about how Gen Z's experience with pop culture is different than not just millennials, but any previous generations. I don't know if you've spent a lot of time working with Gen Z or maybe just observing things on TikTok, but have you noticed any other differences in their experiences compared to ours?
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously there's the fragmentation, which we've kind of discussed heavily, but
Hmm.
even more than that, they like live in a world where like being an influencer or being a creator is like a genuine like option.
Yeah.
Whereas like for those of us in our generation, for the most part, it was like you're kind of the odd one out if that's something that you're actually pursuing, you know?
Yeah.
And because there's so many different various ways to monetize, whether it's like getting even a small group of people that follow you and then turning it into a business in some way, or like selling some products, or being as big as Mr. Beast on the other end of the spectrum. It's so ingrained in terms of in the Gen Z mindset that like this is something I can do, that it
Yeah.
really changes the future of the economy in terms of like how people are interacting and changing there. And I've actually said for a long time and believe this strongly that I think some of the most successful people in Gen Z are going to be the people who capitalize on the back end of all of that system. So the people who are understanding of how to work like as an agent in liaising between brands and these creators, learning how to like do all the production stuff in the background pieces. There's like a
Mhm.
huge opportunity in that space for people to like be those people and not then turn that into like, I'm the creator for how you do this, but more so
Yeah.
just like genuinely building that business. There's a huge opportunity there because there's going to only be more and more of these people who are on some level a celebrity.
Mhm. Yeah, this is ringing a bell and is so relevant. I did a recent episode with the director of NIL strategy at the University of Florida, and he was talking about how he does help those student athletes with those connections and figuring out how to turn their brands and expertise into a business. And it's not something I think that any of us are really taught, those back end pieces that you speak to. So I think you're absolutely right that if you can nail that part of it, you could be really successful with it.
Yeah. No, and
Yeah.
I just think that that's like an interesting opportunity and also just like a big differentiator between the generations is like it's a whole new job category and part of the
Mhm.
economy that just didn't exist when we were younger.
Yeah, the idea of like growing up and being a YouTuber. I mean, we were just discovering YouTube, you know, in
Yeah.
our day, but it's a viable option. So good for them. I'm curious. So we talked a lot about this fragmentation in pop culture and how it's going to change things and kind of make it difficult for marketers to tap into those shared experiences. But I'm curious if you can see any benefits of this fragmentation. Something that I thought could be a possibility is going back to the conversation about fame, is that now maybe more artists and brands, they might not have this commercial or mainstream success, but still be very successful in their own little sort of silos and finding their audiences in the corners of the internet. Would you agree with that? Or do you need mainstream success to be successful?
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think you need the mainstream success to be successful. You know,
Mhm.
I think that everyone's level of success is going to obviously vary, but I do think that there's the opportunity for a brand like smaller brands to really like, and we're seeing this now, so this is not like completely new, but
Mhm.
you can really take advantage of like, let me own like this corner of the internet. Like this
Mhm.
is this is the corner that I'm going to own, and I can build a business off that. And if you're not like trying to become the next P&G or Unilever, or you're like have these massive like holding companies or big corporations, you can
Mhm.
find plenty of success there. And so I do think that that's like one of the reasons we see so many brands, obviously not everyone succeeds, but there's a lot of like upstart brands that can succeed as a result of like figuring out their corner of the internet that's really working for them. I strongly believe that there's going to be like multiple, billion-dollar businesses built off of a platform you and I don't even know, exists yet. Like that's just the reality of like where we're going. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity there. And again, I think it's interesting because like the fragmentation piece is also a big part of why I have neuemotion in the first place and why we launched it is because we know that these bigger brands need to start figuring out how they diversify this content because otherwise they're going to miss out on gigantic swaths of potential incremental audiences. And the more that we can like dive in for them and be like, hey, this is what this audience expects and be more tailored to the platforms themselves, the better off they'll be. And I kind of do have the inclination to believe that over time, we talk even fondly already of like the Vine era, which is, RIP. But you have that era of the internet that like brings you back to a certain place. And if we're losing out on these like bigger, icon moments or these bigger like temple pieces, like, whether it's Usher or Shakira in like that age range for us, it's like now, well, no, that was like the big part of the TikTok era. Not to say that TikTok's on its way out, but like, are we going to define those moments and are those going to be the callbacks to moments in time for brands in the future?
Yeah, I feel like I not to go back to the pandemic, but there is a time early on in the pandemic that I kind of categorize as the TikTok era where you had certain songs that everyone was doing at home and, I'm home in the house and in the house board and like the Megan Thee Stallion challenge and all those things. It was like so cemented and solidified in TikTok. So you might be right about that. I could totally see that happening for sure. So I'm curious then, how can brands and marketers really overcome this fragmentation? What do they need to do next? And does this go back to your crunch framework potentially?
Yeah, no, I think it starts with understanding that the platforms themselves, like understanding the mindset that the audience is entering a platform on and really starting there because you think about, let's like use Reddit as an example. Like on Reddit, you're looking to go discover like something new. You want to have a conversation or discussion. You want to learn something in a subreddit that you subscribe to, or just see cute pictures of a cat, like you kind of want to have that intermix of things.
Yeah.
And so if you understand that like, oh, these people are coming in, like thinking about, they want to see something new, then present them with something new. And that goes back to like the novelty, like a part of crunch. And I think that is like, so you start to think about how you can do that. It's really about the mindset that the audience is entering these platforms on. Because again, I might go to Reddit to talk about college sports. Like I follow like the college basketball and college football subreddits. And I look at that there, but that's not what everyone's going to look at. They're looking at all sorts of stuff. And so the more you can think about, okay, well, in general, at a high level, what are these people entering these spaces like thinking about, or why are they going here? And then I can tailor content that's like meeting what they're looking for. I'm going to see the success I'm wanting to see. Like I don't show up on LinkedIn with a TikTok video. I show up on LinkedIn with like helpfulness. People like want to be helped on LinkedIn for the most part. And so the more you can be helpful, the better success you'll see there. And so those are the things that I think that those are the principles or base layer principles that I think marketers can utilize to think about as they go to approach these different platforms.
Yeah. And meeting your audience where they are and where they're talking about what interests them or what's relevant to your brand. You might default and think, oh, we need to put out a local commercial because that's what's going to get us the most eyeballs. But if you can chime in on a Reddit thread or be in these corners that you might not think are as valuable, but that's where your very qualified, interested audience members are, that makes the most sense. But I think sometimes it's kind of new for marketers to see it that way and not look at like the traditional kind of those big splash marketing brand awareness projects as being the most valuable. So I love what you're doing and how you're getting us to think differently about where to be and what makes the most impact. So yeah. So you mentioned the word iconic earlier, and I I'm just so curious of like what is going to be considered iconic in the future with this fragmentation. Is there going to be those, or are there going to be those ubiquitous iconic moments still? Do you think some things will still transcend that? Or is everything that's iconic going to be relative to you and your generation or where you were on the internet that day?
Yeah. No, I do think that there's still going to be like icons. Like Timothy Chalamet is like an undeniable icon, I think, for even for a younger audience. So I don't think it's completely going away. But if you think about the roster of like actors and actresses that you would consider like A-list in the 2000s compared to what you consider that now, it's a lot of the same people. And I think that that's like, there's going to be fewer and fewer of those things because there is going to be this like different piece. And my gut instinct on this, just like having watched the culture play out and also being on the side of like on the platform side, just seeing lots of stuff happen. My gut instinct is to say, I think the people who will do this well long term is like stringing together icons across multiple interest points that are touching enough people. So, seeing like almost like if you think of, A, B, C, D, E, list celebrities, like go down the list, that there's probably a world down the line where stringing together a bunch of like J-list celebrities, just like pick a random letter down there, will actually be a more effective strategy to like tie them together across these different things than just to be like, oh, we're going to go after the one, because there's going to be fewer and fewer of those, which means they're going to be more and more expensive.
Yeah. So more of a micro influencer kind of approach.
Yeah. But I think the micro influencer will change as like, it's like, oh, this is a micro influencer who happens to have like 3 million people who care about what they do,
Yeah.
But stringing that together with a number of those like starts to, expand the bubble of opportunity for the brand.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier of kind of like reframing what success looks like. Like, I feel like a lot of brands or creators and influencers, they could be a really big deal and like you won't know they're a big deal because maybe they're not on TV, but it's like, yeah, they have 3 million followers and their business is booming and they have a really strong community where people know who they are, but they're not in this mainstream media. So you can still be a big deal but kind of not have that fame, that being recognized on the street and hounded by paparazzi kind of thing. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Although I'm sure that it's a good thing to not be hounded by the problem.
Yes, exactly. It's funny. I don't know if you've been on famousbirthdays.com recently, but if you go on there, they rank the birthdays based on kind of your level of fame. So kind of like going through that A, B, C, D. And a lot of the people at the top that they list first now it'll say like TikTok star, YouTuber. I'm like, who are these people?
Yeah.
But they're making it to famous birthdays, unless they're like submitting themselves. I don't know. But I just think I'm getting old and out of the loop, but it's not those Hollywood stars anymore. It's social media stars that are making that site. So it's weird.
Yeah, no, I think I hate to admit it, but we're getting old.
Yeah. Sadly. Well, it has been so much fun reminiscing with you and doing those callbacks to those commercials and those fun pop culture moments. We will cherish it forever. I know Gen Z will have different shared experiences, but I'm really happy about the time that we grew up. And I think everyone will think fondly of whatever their generation grew up with. So thanks for jogging my memory with all of that today. Is there anything else you'd like to add regarding this conversation or just to kind of close it all out?
One thing. Yeah. I'll call now.
Oh, perfect. Oh my gosh. I really hope I can edit it in here. I'm going to do my best. I'll probably get flagged for copyright by Sears at some point, but didn't Sears like file for bankruptcy? I don't know.
Pretty sure you're probably in the clear there.
Yeah, sounds good. Ted, thank you so much. Like I said, I'm going to link your book. Anything you want to spotlight about entrepreneurial creativity or who it's ideally for? Anyone listening?
Yeah, it's really built for anyone who's looking to create something. It's not just, the title's entrepreneurial creativity. It's really about setting up a system for yourself for repeatable creative success. Oftentimes as creatives, and that's obviously my background, you kind of get caught up in, okay, I want things to be complicated because that means that my work is more meaningful. And what it really does is it holds us back from like seeing the success that we want to see with our work. And so I wrote this as a way of like, hey, how do we like do things over and over again and get better over time? And that's the biggest thing. Like, even for today, I would love to hear that I'm wrong on like, no, they're going to be bigger icons than ever before, down the line. And like, I want to hear that because I want to be learning. And I think that that's the important piece. And so I kind of wrote down, these are the principles I use to build a business inside of Twitter. It's what I'm using to build this business now. It's what I use to even write the book. So it's really meant for anyone who's looking to create. And I hope that everyone gets something out of it.
Yeah, thank you. And as far as neuemotion, what types of clients are you looking for? Maybe reiterate what some of your services are, how people can get in touch with you and call now.
Yes. Yeah. Please call now. No, we're happy to always taking on looking for new clients. Happy to help you. We do a lot of work in the brand marketing space, how we take it to, we kind of talked about this a bit, take it to the different rooms across the internet, make sure that we're taking the blueprint that you're laying for your brand and like actually building out all of these different places across the internet. So we do that. We also can do some consultation, or like if you've got a team internally and you're like, I had to work with like across a ton of different brands. So I've got a lot of experience like honing in and like solidifying a really good production strategy and method. Happy to help there as well. So yeah, so those are the big things: strategy and execution and production, as well as like a bit of like consultation and helpfulness when it comes to working with your internal production teams.
Awesome. Everyone call Ted. I will include all of your information in the description, but this was so fun. We'll have to circle back on this in a few years and see if there are any commercials from right now that are sticking out to us. But right now we're just still stuck in the early 2000s, and I'm not complaining about it.
I don't hate it either.
Yeah. Good times. Thank you so much, Ted. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
If you're a fan of this podcast, be sure to subscribe, or better yet, leave a review. For marketing wisdom with a pop culture twist sent straight to your inbox, sign up for my newsletter at briannefleming.com/newsletter, or find me on Twitter at Brianne2K. As always, thanks for listening.